Hi everyone, this is William from the Headphone Experience. I'm here tonight with my first impressions of the Wells Audio Dragon. This is a hybrid type of tube and solid state headphone amp. This was loaned to me for review by Jeff Wells from Wells Audio. This currently retails at $1,500. The version I have, but there are three different versions of this. The normal Dragon headphone amp retails at $1,500. The level 2, which has several upgrades to the electronics, retails at $2,500, and the level 3 retails at $5,500. And I will try to give you a quick look at this, but I'm not going to be holding this up very long because it is very large and very heavy. And you will be able to see a picture of this behind me on the screen. And I will hold it up one more time and try to show you the back of it. But anyway, this amp uses either 12 BH7 tubes or 6 DJ8 tubes. It has 4 different gain settings. And actually it has a total of 8 settings depending on which tube you're using, but it has 4 settings with each tube. With the 12BH7, you have a choice of either 6 or 0, 6, 12 or 18 decibels of gain, and with the 6DJ8 tube you have a choice of 6, 12, 18 or 24 decibels of gain. So between tubes, with each tube you have 4 different settings, and but a combination of 8 by swapping tubes. It also has 4 ground settings, and all these adjustments are on the top of the amp. I'll try to show you where those are at in a minute. The ground settings, you have a choice of capacitor ground, resistor link ground, a direct ground, or a combination of resistor and capacitor ground. This has one set of inputs, actually 2, but technically 1. On the back of this amp there are RCA inputs and 3-pin XLR, but this is a single-ended amp, and these aren't separate out inputs. It's just 2 different choices for 1 input. The 3-pin XLR, like I said, this is not a balanced amp, but they're for convenience. If you're using XLR cables, you can use that instead of the RCA. And then the outputs kind of work the same way. You've got 2 different outputs on the front, a 6.3 millimeter single-ended output, which is your standard 1/4-inch headphone jack, or you've got 4-pin XLR, but it is also single-ended and is for convenience. If you have a 4-pin XLR cable on your headphone, you don't have to switch cables to be able to use the amp. The power rating on this amp is rated at 2.5 watts per channel into 32 ohms. And I did want to mention that this amp does come with the power cable, and instead of the normal 18 gauge power cable, which most headphone amps and most components come with, this does come with a quite a bit heavier 14 gauge power cable. The signal to noise ratio is rated at 93 decibels, the crosstalk at 88 decibels, and distortion is rated at 0.01% at 1 volt into 32 ohms. I did want to mention that this amp also has a blue LED light on the front, which you can, no, I guess you can't see it in the photo. It's right above the 1/4-inch headphone jack, and what that is for is when you turn on the unit and the power switch is on the top. When you turn it on, that blue light flashes for approximately 70 seconds while the amp is warming up, and there's no output until then. And then when the light stops flashing, that means the amp is ready to go, ready to use. I'm going to try to give you a better look at this amp here a little bit. This is definitely a two-hand Oh, I did want to tell you the size of this thing. It's 10.75 inches wide. It's 16 inches deep from front to back, and about 7.25 inches tall to the top of the cover over the transformer, and it weighs in at about 16 pounds. You can see the front of it here. You have your 1/4 inch headphone jack, a large, very nice, very smooth volume knob, and your 4-pin XLR connection. Try to show you the back. And then on the back you've got your RCA inputs and your XLR inputs and your power supply, your 120 volt IEC power in there. And then I'm going to try to show you the top. And you've got these little switches, and I can't point to them because I'm holding on to them with one hand, but I'll try. Up there you've got your power on and off, and then these here are your gain switches, which you have a choice of 4 different gain settings, and you've got 2 switches on each channel. You kind of have to reach in there with a little screwdriver or something to flip those. You can't reach them. You can't accidentally change them. And it's similar to what SPL uses, but they put theirs on the bottom of the amp, and some companies, a lot of companies do that, and I do like them on the top better. And then you've got some switches by each of your tubes there that you switch depending on which of the 2 tubes you want to use. And then in the middle, down here in the front, you have your choice of your 4 different grounds, either capacitor, resistor, or direct ground. And then down here at the bottom you have your switch for 6 volt or 12 volt depending on what type of tube you're using. So that's about it. I'm not holding this up anymore, it's getting heavy. So this is my first impressions. I've only had this amp, I think I got it in the middle of the week, and it's Sunday now, so maybe 4 or 5 days, or maybe it was Monday. I guess it's been about 6 days I've had this, but I've got a lot of new equipment in right now, and I've put a few hours on it. So this is just my first impressions. I will be back hopefully in about maybe 3 weeks with a full review on this, where I can, after I put several hours on it and try it with several different headphones. And I have already, I've tried a few headphones, and I've tried a couple different DACs with it, and I'll talk about that in a second. Let me get a drink here. So anyway, the first thing that I noticed when I first fired this up is it appears to have huge amounts of power. And the reason I say that is it comes with the gain set at its highest level, which is 18 decibels of gain. So that's where I started out. Well, with it set there, and I was using the, I've tried 2 different DACs with this, the Topping D90 SE that I have in right now, Topping's flagship DAC, and the Topping D70S MQA DAC. And I actually switched from the D90 to the D70 because actually I think I'm leaning towards preferring the D70. It's got a warmer, less analytical sound to it. So anyway, I switched over to that. But when I first took this up on high gain, my most power hungry headphone, which is the Hi-Fi-Man HE560, I was only at about 730 on the volume knob. So, I mean, we're talking way down here. Barely open with the most powerful, or the most power hungry headphone I had with it on high gain, and pretty much the rest of my headphones were just unusable on high gain. I had by the time I cracked the volume open, they were too loud, most of them. Even some of my plainer headphones, like Kennertons and things like that. So I almost immediately switched the gain down a couple notches, and I found out that most of the headphones worked out pretty well with the gain on the second to the lowest setting, which would be 6 decibels. And Now I was up in the normal range, like 8, 9 o'clock on the volume knob with most of my headphones, and it still had enough power for the HE560. But my most sensitive headphones, what I found out, and something I like about this a lot, having the gain controls. A couple of years ago, I reviewed the Wells Audio Milo. And the Milo was an outstanding amp as long as you used hard-to-drive headphones. But I wasn't able to use efficient, easy-to-drive headphones because the noise floor was a little bit too high because of the huge amounts of gain in that amp. I think it had some like 30 decibels of gain. So anyway, if I hooked up something real efficient, I would hear a little bit of hiss in the back and in the background. I didn't like that. Well, this, because of the different gain settings, if I go down to the lowest gain setting, even with my most efficient headphone that I use for testing the noise floors of headphones, I could just barely pick up the slightest hiss. And that was these Sonys, which these are more efficient than most IEMs. They're something like 112 decibels at 1 milliwatt. So anyway, what that means is with this amp, you can, unlike the Milo, you can use this with very efficient headphones. I haven't actually tried it with IEMs, but I'm thinking most of them you probably could use with this with the gain set to the lowest setting, which is 0 decibels. But anyway, after messing around with this, I'd kind of settled in on the second gain setting, which was 6 decibels of gain, where I could use most of my headphones. But still, some of the more sensitive headphones, I was down around 730 on the volume knob, and it starts at like 7, and like most potentiometer type volume controls, you get a little bit of imbalance at the very beginning. Usually the left channel kicks in a little bit before the right channel. And some of my more sensitive headphones, I was barely past that where the volume leveled out, where I was at a comfortable listening level. So it was real touchy. I didn't have much range. Well, I was looking at it, like I said earlier, I was using the Topping D70S as my DAC, which gives a little bit warmer sound than the D90. And I realized, I looked it up and found out the D70, the output voltage of that is 2.5 volts. And I think standard is pretty much 2.0 volts. So the output was a little high and it just didn't seem to be matching up too well with this amp. I just didn't have enough. The volume was too touchy and I was at too low of levels. So fortunately, that D70, it does function as a preamp and you can drop the volume on it I was using the RCA outputs. So anyway, what I did on the D70S, I dropped the volume to minus 10 decibels and tried everything again, and that seemed to work out a lot better. Okay, now if I was on high gain, the volume knob was about 9 o'clock with my hard-to-drive HE560s, and I could actually use some of my other headphones with this, some of the planar headphones like the Hi-Fi Man Sandara and Kennertons and things like that. But I did find out dropping down to the third highest gain setting worked out better for those. Going down to 12 decibels of gain was a better place to run the easier to drive planar headphones, but I could still run the 560s up at about 12 o'clock on the volume knob if I was at 12 decibels of gain. So that seemed to work out a lot better, running the Topping D70S with the volume set at minus 10 decibels. Just seemed to work in better balance with this amp here, and it just has a huge amount of gain, and putting 2.5 volts into it just seems to be too much. So that's how I settled out. I ended up where with most headphones I'm using the third gain setting, which is 12 decibels, and then more sensitive headphones like say the Grotto SR80E or the LSA HP2, which are pretty sensitive. I could still use them on 12 decibels of gain, but if I drop down to 6, put me up further on the volume knob, where I had a little bit more control. It wasn't as touchy. So, and I didn't even have to drop down, to the 0 gain like I did with the output on the topping a lot higher. So that seemed to balance out a lot better. So I haven't even really talked about the sound of this. Like I said, I've got a few hours in on it, maybe 3-4 hours. And my observations are that it's a little on the warm side of neutral, not incredibly warm, not like a full tube amp, especially not like an OTL type tube amp. It's not quite that warm, but it's more on the warm side than any of my solid state amps. And it's definitely, it's not thin, it's not dry, it's not sterile sounding, and it's definitely not analytical sounding. I've actually spoke to Jeff Wells about this on the phone, and I know that what he shoots for with his amps is musicality, something that's going to sound smooth and liquid and pleasant. That's how I would describe this amp. It sounds pleasant, like the Milo did. The Milo was one of the most tube sounding solid state amps I've heard so far since I've been doing reviews, and I don't remember, it's been 2 years, I don't remember. I can't tell you how this sounds compared to the Milo, but this definitely has more of a tube sound than any of the solid state amps I have. It's kind of in between, and that's pretty much what you would expect from a hybrid type amp. It's not a full tube amp, it is, a combination tubes and solid state, and that's the way it sounds. It's kind of halfway in between a typical solid state amp and your typical all tube amp. But like I said, it's just got a very slightly warm, very pleasant, never analytical sound to it, and so far I'm really enjoying it, but it doesn't give up any detail. Like the Milo, it is very clean and very detailed, and I don't feel like I'm missing out on anything. That warmth doesn't take anything away. So, like I said, Jeff strives to, he puts musicality above everything. And it's instead of trying to strive for that absolute last bit of detail or whatever, and there's no detail lacking from this. It sounds really good. I'm really impressed by this amp so far, and now I've got this thing worked out with the DAC. And I'll tell you what, when I first tried this, I had just got the Topping D90 in, and that's their flagship DAC. And to be honest, I thought that this amp sounded a little more dry and a little more sterile than I was expecting it to. But I soon realized when I tried that DAC with other amps that that's just kind of the way that DAC sounds. It's the D90 is, from what I've heard, one of, if not the best measuring DACs on the planet, but compared to the D70, the D70 definitely has a warmer, more, a richer, more liquid sound to it. And to tell you the truth, so far I think I'm leaning towards the D70. I mean, the D90 may have just slightly more detail, but the D70 has plenty of detail and just, a sound I prefer. And so it's working out pretty good with this amp. And but like I said, I've had to drop the volume on it by 10 decibels to make it match up. And I have noticed that the D70 with most of my amps, it is a little bit louder at the same volume position as most of their DACs, so that the output of the D70 does seem to be kind of on the high side. So it is a good thing that it is adjustable. So anyway, I'm going to wrap this up. This is getting pretty long here for a first impressions, but yeah, I'm really enjoying this so far. I guess really my very first impression was just the size and weight of this thing. It is a large amp, and takes up a little bit of room, but it definitely gets people's attention, and I like the way it looks. It does look nice. So I'm going to try to get back with you in about 3 weeks with a full review on this after I spend some more time. And I've got some nice headphones to try out with this. I got the Kennerton Ragnar, which is their flagship closed-back headphone, and I have had a little bit of time with that with this, and the combination of the two is really, really nice. So going to try to get back to you about 3 weeks and dive a little deeper into the sound of this after I know a little more about it. And until then, if this video helped you, please give me a thumbs up. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel, and you're all welcome to join us at the Headphone Experience on Facebook. We're up to, I think, 14.6 thousand members, maybe even more than that. We're growing pretty fast right now, so I'd like to see you over there. Once again, thanks for watching my video.